So welcome to this Future of Product webinar series. This webinar series is basically, we are talking about here the most important topics of product creation. So covering these agile processes and roles, product management, portfolio management, and of course the tools that we are talking about today. So our topic today is how to manage R&D backlogs in Jira. And of course, also theory how those generally are handled in paper as well. So agenda, we have different level of backlogs. We have initiatives, we have epics, and of course we have team level backlogs. So we have example of those, and we will demonstrate how those are built in Jira. So your host today are me, Timo Leppä. I'm a lead consultant and agile coach in Eficode. I have over 20-year background from product development, and the last 15 years I have worked as a coach and trainer to help product development organizations to adapt agile practices and of course the tools itself as well, mainly the Atlassian tools. And my colleague,
my name is Panu, as you can see from the screen. I'm working pretty much in the same role as Timo, and also I've been working with the Atlassian toolset mostly, but also with some other tools, and I'm also involved in training and coaching, also other areas of development, more related to the development work itself, like utilizing Git and other development tools, etc., etc.
Yeah. So let's go to the agenda and the actual thing. So here we have the typical structure of the items what product development has and how those are implemented also in Jira. We have the initiative items. This is something like the business case. It's really the high level item that defines why we are doing this. Often this is also handled in Confluence. We have the previous sessions we have or previous webinars, we actually discussed this as well. So the content is actually in the Confluence side, where we can have different kind of canvases, the documentation itself, describing what we really need. And then we have this item also in Jira side that we can follow easily the structure, how it's break down to the smaller items. Then we have the epics or features, and it's really something that the Jira epic, it should describe the actual functionality, something that we can release as well. So some releasable item. And similar way, we are defining what is really needed. And quite often this is something that multiple team can work with one epic. And then
sorry, just to interrupt, maybe just to highlight it, that epic is really something that has a start and an end, and it's providing some features, some functionality. We've sometimes seen these continuous epics where the epic is something that it's kind of a component of the product, and we just attach everything that's related to that one epic. But the idea of an epic really is that it has a clear start and end.
Yeah. And generally, when we are talking about Jira issues, they're like the work items. There are different level of work items, so they are starting and they will end. And if you need this kind of like continue object, it could be Jira component, or it can be something else that gives that information what is needed.
Exactly.
And then we break down this epic to the story level. So once again, often known user stories. So it's some functionalities for the end user itself. And we recommend that this user story or the story item is also team responsible item. So we don't define this per individual. We define this as a function that team will implement during the sprint. So the size needs to be something that you can really implement and test it as well during the iteration what you have. And then, of course, we might have tasks and bugs. So the task is something normally that it's not visible to the end user, and bugs is something that appeared after it's released perhaps to the end user. So there's something that doesn't work correctly. So these are the typical backlog items, and then we have the subtasks still what we can use. So if we would like to split the story, even smaller work items, normally then the subtasks are owned by some individual team member. So makes it perhaps easier to follow that the full story will be implemented during the sprint. Anything to add, Panu, here?
Not really. I think it's pretty much as you said it.
Yeah.
Of course, we have sometimes teams who decide that we work together for such a long time that we no longer need to use subtasks to make everything work. And of course, in that case, the team can decide so that, well, let's just create the story. And then after that, we know that one guy will be doing UX design, another person will be implementing the front end, another one the back end, somebody will be responsible for testing, and they can do it all without the subtasks. But when a team is starting up and when we are starting to utilize Jira, I would strongly recommend trying out the subtasks for a few sprints at least, just to see that everything really works like that.
Yeah. So how we are then managing those different level of items, we need to have some kind of views and backlogs for those. So for initiative, we need to have the initiative level items. Quite often this is called portfolio Kanban or business epic Kanban or something similar. But this is really the top level items what we are having in Jira as well. And basically the phases or the columns what we have over here might difference in different companies. So the main idea is to get the understanding of the initiative level items. So really defining the business case that you need to have kind of definition ready, definition done, also implemented, that what we are doing over here, when it's approved, what needs to be defined for that, and then for implementation, implementing. And here we have example also the value realized. This could be something that we are actually measuring. Did we get what we were trying to get out from that initiative? So really some kind of metrics. Did we actually realize the value that we thought that it will give us?
And it can be quite typically that maybe we thought that with these implementations, we will realize the business case we thought about originally, and later on we might figure out that actually we are not getting that value. But maybe if we create few extra epics, implement those, maybe then we are able to realize the business case value, and that's why we might want to have a separate status for the initiative also for this purpose, that we are measuring how it's going and making decisions based on the information we have.
Yes. And then the next level is basically the Jira Epic level or the feature level board. So there we would like to see all the related features or epics what we have. Once again, the status is what we have can be different. The main thing is that we can easily manage those and once again prioritize, see what we have done with which epics and so on, and see which are in implementation phase. This initiative and epic level workflows can be different, and quite often they are different. The Jira Epic doesn't need to have such a long workflows that where we're actually more analyzing the business case and so on. And the final thing is the team board that I think most of the Jira users are familiar with. So we have the Scrum or Kanban boards where we have the backlogs. So there we have those stories and tasks and bugs and all the items, backlog items, what the teams are working. And we just want to highlight that these are really the views to the content what we have or what the business has there. And we can have different boards for different purposes as well. So if we are thinking some kind of safe implementation and there is this agile trains, we might have multiple epic for different purposes, like different team might have own subset of those features for Jira epics. Okay, and then on an example about this, how this could look like.
Yeah, so, currently we have an example of this, how it might work. Let's say the example is that, let's say we are working for a bank. We are creating a website for a bank and the web application for doing banking for the customers. And we have now a few initiatives that we've been talking about. The first one is called digitalization of housing loans. What it means is that we thought that it would be a good idea that our customers can apply for a housing loan online, and we can have online meetings with the customers to discuss their need, discuss their situation, and then also make decisions based on this in the bank, that are we actually going to grant the loan for the persons? Are we not going to do it? And of course, the business case might be that we don't need to have the people coming into the bank office. Maybe we need to have less bank offices. Me as a person working in the bank can handle more loan applications, and I can specialize more on that if I want to. Then other examples of initiatives that we could have in the bank is in a similar way handling consumer credit loans. Maybe we could brokerage some insurances for our consumer customers so that they maybe they want to buy an insurance while they are bank customers, etc., and we might get good prices for them and so forth. If we focus a bit more on the first initiative there, and we have now divided it into epics, and if you look at the epics that we have, or if we once we go through them, you can consider that we try to break them down in a way that we can release each of those epics for the end users individually, so that all of them don't need to be ready at the same time, but we can have one of the epics ready and have that running for the end customers, and they can already utilize that, and maybe we get some value out of that already, even though some of these are still under implementation. How we divided this example initiative into epics is that the first epic that we have there is the customer can come to the bank webpage and they can apply for a housing loan. Probably they want to include some information there, what they want to purchase, what's their financial status, etc., and that's basically what we want to do in the first phase. So they can do that. Then we have a second epic where we have online meetings, and this is that the bank personnel can actually invite an online meeting with their own applicants, discuss with them, get more information from them as necessary, and then finally third epic where the bank personnel is again managing the loan applications, deciding what kind of interest rate everybody is going to get. Are we actually going to grant the loan in the first place? How much loan we can grant to this particular person or persons, etc., etc. Then if we start looking at the first of these epics again in more detail, we have divided that into user stories. And of course, there are several ways how you could do this. We did kind of a textbook example with this one. So the first story we have on the left is the simplest possible thing that you can probably do in this kind of work. So we decided that the first user story our team is going to be implementing is that we will create the web form for asking for the loan. And on that form, we will only have one field where you can put in your name, nothing else. But what we want to do in the same user story is that the name that user inputs on the loan form gets actually saved to the system. It gets saved to the backend. So we have implementation work on this particular story for all hierarchies in the architecture, for all parts in our solution. Probably most of the team that's working on this area needs to do something for it. Other user stories we have there, we didn't define all of them, so you could think more, but we, for example, added there that you can separately modify an application you have created initially. You can see your existing applications, and then some user stories where there's, for example, possibility to add information about other family members and their financial status and so forth and so forth. So we have divided this into smaller user stories, and maybe it could even be that in some cases, some of the stories are such that we don't even need to implement them in the first phase before we release the functionality to the customer. In this case that we have here, I think we actually would be doing all of this. Besides the stories we have here, it could have been that Maybe we want to have separate tasks for this, for example, designing the UX, the usability for the long application and so forth. Then when we start dividing the stories into subtasks, we can quite easily think that what they are, and often this is where the teams are very good at and developers are very good at coming up that what's the actual work we need to do to realize this user story. So for example, for the simple form with a name on it that we can save, probably we need to do some kind of design work between the UI and backend people that how's the API going to be, what sort of messages will we be sending back and forth. We need to implement the front end and the back end. We need to do some testing. There could be, again, some work for installing the servers and setting up firewalls and doing all kinds of stuff as well. But we just tried to keep things simple and didn't bring all of that information up here.
Yeah. And because we are now or today talking about the backlogs, we would like to emphasize all the time that try to keep the items in correct level. So the stories should be something that are really like a team effort. Quite often we see actually that teams are creating this kind of implement front end back end already in the backlog. And what happens then that the backlog actually expanded, it will be a huge long list of the items. And then the managing of those is really hard. So try to formalize the stories, and then you can break down the subtasks if you need those. We will demonstrate that how it looks like today.
Yeah, so about that, the subtasks are not really visible on the backlog. So to keep the backlog clean, we want to make stories which combine the effort from several people. And that way also, it helps with communication. We can easily discuss that. What is this story about? What is that story about? And it's easy to understand for people outside of the development team. One problem is that if what we currently have as subtasks here, if those become visible on the backlog, on the story level, then discussion about those stories and tasks becomes very difficult with the stakeholders. Prioritization can be impossible because, well, you will need both front end and back end, for example, for the functionality to make any sense.
Exactly. Okay, so that was shortly theory point of view about the backlogs and how that could be implemented also in Jira. So let me now show you how it actually looks like in Jira. Can you, Panu, see my initiative?
Yes,
good. And is it enough big? Or
yeah, I think it's very readable.
Yeah. So here we have once again example, the same thing that we did go through in the slides. We have the initiative Kanban, that is the highest level of items what we have in here in our example. So here we have those initiative or business case things. We have this digitalized housing loan management item over here, and we have those different items as well. So once again, you need to figure out what columns you need, and you make the workflow based on that. And I personally like that those are some like easy to use. So this is the workflow is that you can go in any state. Of course, if it's needed more process oriented workflow, you can define that as well. And when you create this kind of initiative or portfolio Kanbans, it depends also the structure of how you have identified your Jira projects. Do we have product projects, or do we have solutions, or do we have team level projects? So the main thing is that you just need to create the filter, the query, so that you get the correct items to this board. So I can show here in our example how we have defined it. So if I go board settings, I have here filter that will check only project PRT, what is our portfolio project, and the issue type initiative. Because in our example, we have all the issues or all the initiatives are actually in this specific project. But if you have multiple projects where you have those initiative items, then you just need to create the query so that it will find them. And you might have more criteria, of course. So the query can be as complex as is needed, depending your setup of Jira. So quite straightforward. And the columns over here, so based on the workflows, what you have, so you define those columns in that way. So here, and also what we recommend that you are limiting also how many items you can have in different statuses or phases over here, because what you are trying to do, you should avoid working parallel with multiple items. Of course, in this level, you have those more than in lower level, perhaps, but still focusing that what you start, you finalize that as well. And as we can see over here, really shortly, so this is the initiative item, and here we can see the child issues as well. So we have the Jira epics. We are using here actually the parent linking. So we have the advanced roadmap used here as well. We are not going today to that functionalities. But if you are not using the advanced roadmap, you can just use normal linking. You can create own link type called parent child or something like that. And then you are linking those items to the initiative so that you can easily see and follow them. Here you can see actually also the Confluence page that we have attached. If you have more like strategy level things, or you would like to somehow group the initiatives also, you can use label or another attributes, and then using this quick filter to see only visualize, like in this our example, we have business to customer loans, so we can see those initiatives over here. So if you would like to somehow follow those items only. Anything to add here, Panu?
Maybe just you already mentioned that typically we want to try to keep it so that we implement a reasonable number of anything at the same time. And the theory behind that usually is that we actually want to implement everything we start as quickly as possible. We are hopefully smart in making decisions, and we have figured out that the digitalization of housing loans is the most valuable item that we have, and getting that all the way to the end customers as quickly as possible is the most profitable way for us to work. And that already dictates that we should actually spend as much development resources on this thing as we can, because that's where most of the money can be made from is. And that's the reason why we want to finalize it as quickly as possible. It's less productive to spend money, for example, on something that we currently have in the business case analysis or even in the approved for implementation column.
Yeah. Okay, so if we go then epics, you could actually, Panu, share those.
Yes, I'll start sharing from my end, and let's just see that it starts actually working as well. Okay, can you, Timo, see it?
Yes.
All right, good. So what we are currently looking at, this is a Kanban board where I have a list of epics for my team. And as we already discussed with the initiatives, we can create any kind of views into the data that we have in Jira. So I could create a board where I only see epics which are, for example, assigned to one team or few teams that are working on these topics. And this might be an area that I'm really interested in. Or we could have another board where we see all the epics in the company. If we are a huge company, it might be that we have tens of epics active at the same time. Nevertheless, I would still try to be reasonable and think that if I'm looking at a view where I have more than 20, 30 items, it starts to be that I become blind for them. And having a view where I only look at the things which are really relevant for me makes everything much more interesting and makes it easier for me to focus on the right topics. So currently I've created a view where I see only the epics that I'm currently interested in, and I'm trying to focus on following on those. What we can also see on the board, I have defined much less columns than we had on some other examples. So I've tried to keep things relatively simple here. And then I have each of my epics that I'm currently working on visible here. The first one here is the one we already discussed earlier when looking at backlog structures about creating a housing loan application. The information we can see about it on the board already is that we have defined that we are planning it so that we try to finalize the work for it during the first quarter of this year. And I would assume that this is the time when we are releasing it also for our customers. Other things we have made visible on the board here is the size of each epic, and we have used T-search sizing for the epics. So I have medium, large, something here is small. So we have decided that that's a reasonable way for us to size the epics. Typically, the epics are from 1 month to a few months of implementation. So it kind of makes sense that we can all guess that if we have a small one or we have a large one, then probably the small one is 1 or 2 months of work. The large one is maybe 3 months, maybe even a bit more, so something like that.
Yeah, and for the sizing, I think it's quite important that we are giving the kind of the job size or the guesstimation of the epic as well, because it helps the prioritization, like a portfolio point of view or the product point of view. When we know that we have tens of items and we know that we can actually implement in quarter or increment, if we are talking about let's say 10 features or 10 Jira epics, then we know it better that, okay, when this is the effort, we can actually implement only these, or we can start implementing only these features. So we are not pushing too much items to the development teams.
And also, when we know that something is relatively small, maybe it doesn't bring as much value as something else, but if it's really quick to do, maybe it's still worthwhile doing that quickly and getting it done and to the customers and starting to realize the value from that thing already, and then starting to implement the bigger things that we have pending.
Yeah.
As we already mentioned earlier, also, how often do we want to follow up each of these views? What Timo showed earlier was the initiative view where we have all the high-level items. I would expect that there's not many changes happening on that board for the items there. Maybe it's useful to follow it up once every 3 months on some forum. When we are looking at the epics, we mentioned that these typically take from 1 month up to implement. Maybe following up the epic board makes sense roughly every month, maybe, so that we have an idea that what's really going on there, and we can see the progress and see that what we are currently working on, what we need to start refining and defining so that we can start working on it as soon as we have capacity for it.
Yeah, and one important thing here is that even this is not the normal backlog view that you have used probably from the Scrum teams. We can still prioritize these. We have the ranking that we can put the order of these, and they should be in correct order, that top item in this column is the most important and so on. Once again, it makes easier to read and prioritize and discuss the items.
Exactly. Then if I go to look at the team backlog, that's the lowest level of backlogs and work items that we have. So I'll just change to a different board here. And we go to look at the team backlog. I'm currently in the ongoing sprint in the team, but I'll jump to the backlog side there. So this would be my team backlog. What we can see here are sprints which we have planned for the team. Currently, we can see that I have 1 sprint here, which is actually currently ongoing. And I have few issues only planned to that one. Then I have an upcoming sprint, the next sprint that's coming up. I have some content planned for that as well. And then I have a backlog of items that we haven't really planned for any of the sprints yet. We can, of course, plan as many sprints beforehand as we want to. But on the other hand, it's again a pattern that we see that if we try to plan really carefully what's going to be happening in 2 months' time on each user story level, usually those plans are not really that accurate. Of course, we can still make them to kind of be informative for the other groups or other people who are looking into our backlog and into our team. But most of the time, we know ourselves that we pretty much know what's going to be happening within the next 2 weeks. We have relatively good idea of the 2 weeks after that. But beyond that, usually we know that content will be changing. There will be changes to what we do, and we'll just react to that as things go.
Yeah, and if you are planning like if you are using scaled agile framework, of course we are trying to plan this one increment, but even there we need to think that the sprints which are in more future, there is more this flexibility. So don't use all the capacity. If we know that we have 30 points, don't put 30 points there, because it's quite certain that there will be some changes. So be flexible also if you are planning those futures. They're more like placeholders.
Yeah. And when we look at otherwise the content that we have planned into the sprint, I have a relatively low number of items in each of my sprints. I only have 4 items in the ongoing sprint, 6 items in the next one. I've seen teams where it might be more like 50 items in a sprint. As we discussed earlier, typically when the user stories are what they should be, they are team effort for the whole team to realize some functionality for our customers. Then we can live with much less items per sprint, and it makes the follow-up much easier and the discussion within the team much easier. If we have 50 items per sprint, my first guess would be that maybe the items are actually for individual developers more than for the whole team to implement them. And that's kind of one of the anti-patterns that we often see, that why things get very complicated for the teams and the sprint plannings are very difficult, and the sprints never realize the content that we planned into them. Planning is difficult because, well, you need the both front end and the back end of this thing, and they are separate tasks instead of within one story, etc., etc. So really trying to utilize the stories as they are meant to be utilized is the key to being successful with the sprints and with overall managing the backlogs properly. Also, we can see that the whole backlog I have here, we only have 11 items there. We could discuss whether that's actually smart. Should we have opened up some of the future epics a bit more so that we have more user stories there? It also usually gives us a better idea of the future epics, that what exactly they will contain, how much work there is involved in them. But now when we have example data, we have kept things like this.
Yeah, and same thing here when we have the backlog over here, that should be in priority order. So team, the product owner and the scrum master and the whole team is of course responsible that should be in correct order. So when we are doing the planning, if there is some reason we have more time during the sprint or otherwise, we can just take the next item from the backlog. So always in priority order would be our advice for you.
Yeah. And if we look a bit in a bit more detail, what we have here on the backlog, we can actually see the epic that each of the stories or tasks is related to on the backlog as well. The blue ones now here, they are called housing loan applications. So this is the one where the user makes a housing loan application on our web page, and then managing the housing loan applications is orange. And this means that the bank personnel can then look at the incoming applications and make decisions based on them. And we can actually see that we have divided the housing loan application into user stories. Those stories are already in the backlog. Then if we start looking at what do we have of the orange one here, we can see that for the next sprint, we have actually planned some preparation work, discussion with the loan specialists that what information they actually need, making information security plan for that functionality, making usability design for that functionality, and probably this then leads into us breaking the thing into user stories, being able to evaluate those stories efficiently because we have all the information we need for this purpose.
Yeah. So having those different issue types, when they have different meaning, it makes the backlogs also more readable. So you can easily see that, like here we have the tasks, which are the the blue icon and the stories are the green one. So we can easily see which are actually the user stories, which are some kind of tasks, what we need to still do, but it doesn't deliver as such some values to the customer or the end user.
Yeah. The way that we can see the epics on the backlog when we are on the team view is from the left side. We have this small thing on the left side where it reads epics, and that then opens up the epics for us as a list, and we can see them in the priority order again. And if I click on one of the epics, for example, the housing loan application, then that filters the backlog view so that I only see the items related to this particular epic. If I open the epic a bit more up, I can see that how many stories or actually issues we have related to it, what's currently going on with them, how many of them are done, how many are still pending, what's the current story point estimate, and so forth and so forth.
Yeah, that I would say that's really handy for the product owners and the teams as well to see kind of overview where we are going with the Jira epics as well. At least when you have multiple of those, so you can easily just filter out the specific Jira epic and see where we are with that item.
Yeah. And of course, as always, we have stuff coming in besides the epic work. We can see that currently already we have planned to fix some bugs in our sprints. It could be that we have support requests or improvement ideas related to, for example, let's say how we run our environment or how we operate our system or something else. And all of those can come in, and they can come into the backlog, and we just value them against the new functionalities we are doing and decide in which order we are doing those. Again, same applies for those as for everything else. Try to avoid having huge, really small and tiny items which are for only one individual developer. Rather consider what's the real value that we are getting out of this. Is it, for example, improving the stability of our system and then creating a task out of that, maybe creating some subtasks underneath it and combining some small things into one instead of handling them as separate items on the backlog. Then finally, if we want to, we can have a quick look at the active sprint, what's currently going on in the sprint that I have open here. I'll just very briefly show how I have them organized in this example. So currently, now that I only have few user stories that the team is implementing, how I would personally want to see them in my team is that let's see story by story what's going on. So this is the highest priority story. We are close to ending our sprint. Things are looking okay. It seems that everything related to that is done. So let's close that away. Then how is the next story in the list doing? We can see that UX design is done, API design ongoing. Then we have some other subtasks which we haven't started yet. So this is probably what the team will be working on this week, and hopefully then completing those in good time before we actually reach the end of the sprint. So it's just a way of grouping the work in the team together and then discussing each topic at the time, instead of trying to see that what's each and every person in the team is doing, rather seeing how are the most important items doing, going through them one by one. And maybe it helps me as a developer to realize that I'm working on now something which is on priority 7 in the sprint. And the second highest priority item, we actually don't have anybody to, for example, do the backend implementation, and I could help with that. So maybe I'll prioritize my work to actually be doing this part myself.
Yeah. And as we can see over here, if you just still expand those stories, so we have here we have here 5, and we did have 8 subtasks in this the top 1 item. So if we and think when we have, let's say, 10 user stories, and then every of those stories has 8 subtasks. If we are using those as a task issue type, and all of those will be in your backlog, it will be a huge. And then, like Panu was also mentioning, the prioritization and the follow-upping that we are doing the correct thing comes really tricky, because we need to do back end and front end, that we actually are implementing the whole story or the whole functionality. So that's why we are recommending this using the subtask instead of just task. And if you still go actually the backlog view, so we can see the same over here quite nicely. Was it the first one, this create the loan application? So if you just click that one, so we can actually see the subtask here as well.
It's just loading quite slowly, but it will show them eventually.
Yeah.
There we have them. It only took 1 minute.
Exactly. So to have those subtasks separately, we can easily see those, we can easily discuss with the team, but the subtasks are not something that the product management is interested. They are just interested about the story itself. So that's why it's good to have those here separately in the subtask if they are needed.
Yeah. And as said earlier, if the team thinks they can work fine without them, that's cool, but
exactly,
maybe trying it out just for the sake of having clearly defined stories might be a good idea for most teams.
Yeah. And of course, this was quite simple example how we have set up this. So when we have multiple teams, of course, they have their own team boards, and probably we are using some kind of attribute. We can use team name or we can use label. It depends if you are using some kind of add-ons top of the Jira. So just filtering the correct items in correct board that the people or the teams are working with correct items. So that's it. Just basically scaling up what we have implemented over here. Okay. So I think that was shortly about the backlogs and how you can implement those in Jira and manage those. We have here some time, so if we have some questions, we could go those through. I can put my camera on as well. Substories are not visible in Kanban board, just user stories. Yes, basically in Kanban board you can actually see this subtask if you would like to. So you need to go to the board settings and you can see those subtasks in the Kanban board, but in Scrum board you don't see those in the backlog. That's correct. How would you handle maintenance for long life services in Jira? Also with an epic or just a task? Yeah, this is quite commonly asked. And how you can of course have Jira Epic as a kind of maintenance work, but and why it's quite often used is the visualization. So you have one epic that you put all the maintenance stuff there, and you can follow up that. So it's kind of the folder. I don't have really strong opinion about it, but of course I recommend really that mainly the Jira epics are something that will start and end, or you really. Yeah,
I would even say that I have a strong opinion about it. I would say that don't make an epic for maintenance. Create them as you proposed in the question here. Should I have them simply as tasks? I would say that yes, let's have them as tasks. Maybe some of those will then we figure out that this is actually something that how we could improve our product. Maybe we will create a story or even an epic out of it. So maybe the task then gets transformed into something else. Or it could be that it's a bug in our product and we decide to fix it. But I would have them as tasks, at least to begin with, and then handle them from there.
Yeah, this is kind of the hard topic because you can use Jira so many different ways, and because of the limitations as well, people start to use that like in innovative way, and this using Jira Epic as a folder for maintenance or part of the actual product, it happens quite often actually. We see that, and the main thing is like Panu was demonstrating, that you can not quite nicely just click the epic in the backlog view and it will filter out only those things. But however, at least from product product creation or product development point of view, we really recommend that the feature is something that you can release and deliver some value.
Yeah, good. Should we park this one and move on to the next one?
Yes.
So
yes.
We have another question, which is a really good one. This comes up quite often. We said that our user story is piece of an epic. And then the question is that, well, how about, can we actually have a user story without an epic? I would say that absolutely yes.
Yes.
If you have something small, let's say it's an improvement to the current functionality we have, you can just as well go ahead and create it as a user story, not link it to any epic. And Timo already mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to highlight that the way that Jira is built up and planned to be used is that the size of the item, how much effort we are going to spend on working on an item, defines what type of an item it is. So if something is only a few days of work, it's a user story. And if something is months of work, it's an epic. And it's just how we have designed Jira to work and how it's easiest to utilize Jira. And it can well be that, let's say we want to change the size of this button, put it somewhere a bit different and give some user guidance so the users find it in a better way. Create an individual user story, put it in the backlog. The team product owner will then prioritize that against everything else we do, and we'll do it when the time is right.
Yeah. And this also applies to the Jira Epic level. Not all the Jira Epic needs to be connected to some initiative item. So, because now we should think that the initiative level item is normally something that the portfolio management are doing. So we have the portfolio items there, and then we are breaking down those to the features and stories and so on. But of course, like we have maintenance, or we have something else, and there might be that we need to create a feature, a feature that is not actually connected to any portfolio item. And then we have separate feature, and of course, still those are prioritized together with the portfolio item. So it doesn't need, so don't create maintenance initiative, because you are always maintaining your products. So that is really important. Okay. And then we have a new one. You mentioned business case on the initiative.
Maybe I can shorten it. So yeah. Marco is asking that, well, in a business case, we typically have the return of investment, how much it's going to cost us, and all the other things related to it. And once we have implemented the initiative, we already mentioned that we want to follow up that are we actually getting the benefit that we thought that we are getting out of it. And then the question is that, shouldn't we also be interested in following up that how good was our estimate, how much effort did we spend on doing it, how close to it we were. And of course, that is part of how it works, and of course we can follow it up. Of course, one thing is that, or maybe just I think you have the same point here, but I think that it's not really, when we made the estimate in the first place, we made it based on the information we had at the time. Now, how accurate was our estimate? Were we 20% off, were we 100% off with our estimate? Yeah, okay, that happens. And we made the estimate based on the best information at hand. And of course, we can then say that if our estimates are always completely off, that maybe we should focus more on doing the estimates so that we get better information, so that we don't, for example, overspend some money on some feature that will never return that investment for us, because we are going to anyhow pay twice the price for it than we thought. So in that sense, yes, it's useful to follow up that how the estimates are realizing and how things are going. On the other hand, as long as we estimate so that we know that this one is definitely smaller than the other one, or this one is twice as small as the other one, etc., it still gives us an indication of which of the business functionalities we should do next, and and in that sense helps us make the right decisions.
And still shortly, of course, when we create this initiative, we have made those calculations and estimations. We are still all the time kind of following up that the initial effort was this, but now we're halfway. Do we still understand the business case same way? If it's like a large initiative, it might be that the business is changed somehow, or the field has changed or something like that. So we need to adjust all the time. And it might be that we can even make the decision that we are not implementing this anymore. So of course, then it was kind of the loss of the money or effort that we had done, but we don't put any more effort to that business case.
Yeah. Good. I hope we can also consider that answer. Please ask for the chat if you feel that there's something open still. Maybe we move on to the next one where the question is that what are actually then going to be the testable items for what we need, or for what do we need to have the acceptance criteria? Is it for only user stories? Is it also for epics? Is it for initiatives? Is it for subtasks? And well, if I answer this, and then Timo, you can correct me and also point out if you have something to add. I would say that mostly the acceptance criteria, as said also on the question, I would say most importantly, it applies for the user stories. We want to make sure that those we have a clear acceptance criteria for. Also, I would say that for the epics and initiatives, we have some kind of an acceptance criteria. I've seen that maybe for the epics, it can still be acceptance criteria. For the initiative level, I might even think that it might be called success criteria. So it could say that this initiative has been successful when, for example, talking about the housing loans, that when we have received 1,000 housing loan applications, we can say that our housing loan business is starting to go forward, and we can then say that it's been successful, or it has created revenue of value X or Y or Z or something else like that. Then the question about can we validate subtasks, I would say that, well, no, we cannot. They are not functionalities that we validate. It's stories, and testing itself can actually be one of the subtasks on a story in some cases.
I agree. So story levels definitely, the epic or feature level probably, but more like also like you mentioned, success criteria, because when we are implementing this feature or the Jira epics, it's a much more bigger thing and more really like a business perspective. So it might be that we need to create more stories later on. So the success criteria is like more probably in that level, and definitely subtask. It's really like a item that we are working. They don't need to have those. So don't put effort for those. Put effort more to the story level. Okay. Do we still have?
We had another question. Maybe Timo, you take that. I'll get a charger for my laptop quickly.
Yeah, okay. So let me check. Have you ever seen OKRs used in initiative context to set objectives and measurable key results along the way? Yes, so this is, and once again, if we are talking about different frameworks like Scaled Agile framework, say we have those OKRs or the objectives. They are not. They are kind of related to the initiative. So what we are in, I would say that the objectives and the measurable key results. I'm not sure what you are now, what you are having, or because they are not exactly those what are in Jira, but those are kind of needed that we can more easily follow up what we are doing and what the team or the organization are implementing, because at least the initiative level, it's so big item that we would like to understand what part of the kind of implementation we are doing currently. So I would say that the OKRs and also the objectives are important thing. And let me still read again the question. Have you ever seen context to set objectives? So
I would almost say that maybe the OKRs are parallel to the initiatives. So it can be that some of the initiatives are realizing the OKRs and the other way around, that some OKRs are realizing the initiatives.
Yeah, it definitely depends the level of those OKRs. If it's like really like strategic level, they should then based on that we think also how we are managing our portfolio.
Yeah. I think they go a bit side by side. Yeah.
And like managing the objectives, there is actually, depending once again, if you're using different add-ons, there is different kind of views for objectives as well. And you can even create objective issue types and so on if it's needed. From Jira perspective, they're not in the backlog because we have the backlog items separately, but we can of course follow the objective level items.
I think that was the last of our questions. Nobody asked it. I had one in store and I still wanna represent it because it's something that comes up quite often. How do we handle the non-functional requirements? Let's say, for example, in our web bank, we have a requirement that the web pages need to open, we can just say quickly or fast, or we can have a limit that says like each web page needs to open in 1.5 seconds or whatever. Then the question is that how is this visible in Jira? How are we gonna follow up that requirement is filled up? Typically, the non-functional requirements, we don't even want to have them visible necessarily in Jira. They are something, they might be an overall requirement for the product, a feature of the product on a high level that each developer needs to be aware of and each tester needs to be aware of. And of course, when we are implementing the housing loan application functionality, for example, of course, then we as a development team need to make sure that our web pages are loading up fast enough and they are reactive enough so that users are not getting bored and going to another bank to apply for their housing loan.
Yeah. Okay, I think our time is going to, we have like 2 minutes or 1.5 minutes, so I think we can wrap up and close this webinar.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to every participant. Take care. Bye.